In the winter of 1891, a county clerk in rural Louisiana opened a ledger that was not listed in any archive. The book had no spine title, no catalog mark. Its pages smelled of iron and rot, as if soaked in blood and buried alive. When he turned to page 47, he saw a name written 5 times. The same woman. 5 different plantations. 5 recorded births. Over a span of 11 years. And then, nothing. No death record. No sale record. No emancipation entry. The clerk closed the book. He resigned 3 days later. The ledger vanished. Tonight, we reopen it. This is not a story about slavery as history textbooks teach it. This is about systems within systems, about bodies used as instruments, about churches that counted souls but hid sins, and about a woman whose womb became a corridor through which something unspeakable passed. Her name, at least the one that survived, was Hannah. But that was not the first name she was given, and it was not the last. Between 1829 and 1840, 5 separate plantations, each owned by different families, miles apart, with no shared overseers, recorded the birth of a child by an enslaved woman listed as Hannah, age unknown. Hannah, recently acquired. Hannah, unable to speak. Hannah, transferred by request of clergy. Hannah, returned. Returned. That word appears only once in slave birth records across the parish. Each plantation log insists the same impossible detail. She arrived already pregnant. No sale documents exist for her transfer. No bills of exchange. No shipping manifests. She simply appears. Eyewitness letters, private correspondence never meant for preservation, describe her differently each time. One overseer wrote that Hannah did not blink when spoken to. Another claimed she sang hymns in a tongue older than Latin. A plantation wife recorded that Hannah wept every night, but only after the church bells stopped ringing. And then there is the detail that breaks reason apart. Each child was born on the same calendar date, March 19th, 11 years in a row. No midwife's signature repeats. No baptism records survive. The children vanish within weeks. The only thread connecting all 5 plantations is a rural church, small, whitewashed, and officially unaffiliated. Its minutes were never submitted to a diocese. Its pastors rotated every 2 years. None stayed long enough to be buried nearby. The church ledger mentions Hannah, but not as property. She is referred to as the vessel. One sermon transcript, preserved in fragments, speaks of burdened women chosen before chains were forged. Another warns of bloodlines that must be dispersed lest they take root. And every March, the church bell rang at midnight. Once for each year Hannah was present. Former congregants later testified that when Hannah walked through the chapel doors, infants screamed. Candles flickered blue. Mirrors were covered. The church did not own her. It directed her. The earliest birth record comes from 1829. The midwife wrote only one sentence. The child emerged silent, eyes open, marked. No explanation. No description. But in the margins, written later, in a different hand, are 4 words pressed so hard they tore the page. It knew her. The infant disappeared before dawn. The plantation burned 2 months later. No cause recorded. No birth certificates survive for Hannah's children. Instead, there are replacement records, issued weeks later, sometimes months, each assigning a new name, a new date, a new origin. They appear in orphanage registries across the South with identical notes written in different hands. Parentage unknown. Child delivered by church request. Do not reunite. In Natchez. In Yazoo City. In Opelousas. In places that should never share paperwork, yet somehow did. Caretakers described the infants as unsettlingly alert. They did not babble. They watched. One matron wrote that a child tracked her movements like an adult pretending to be small. Another recorded that the children cried only during hymns and fell silent during prayer. None survived childhood in records. They either transferred, entered service, or simply ceased to exist on paper. But rumors did not vanish so easily. St. Elias Home for Colored Youth operated from 1834 to 1872. It had no cemetery. Former staff testimony, taken decades later during a land dispute, describes a locked sub-basement beneath the chapel floor. The door was sealed with iron clasps, not wood. The children were taken there at night for what was called instruction. No lessons were listed. No curriculum. Only one phrase repeats in disciplinary logs. Child spoke before taught. Witnesses reported children reciting prayers backward. Others claimed they spoke of a woman walking through walls, counting years. One boy reportedly asked a priest why Mother Hannah wasn't allowed to sleep. The priest resigned that winter. The orphanage closed soon after, citing structural instability. Two of the children, at least two believed to be Hannah's, were sent north to a seminary in Kentucky. Here, the language changes. They are no longer called children. They are called carriers. The seminary journals speak in coded metaphor. The seed resists containment. Division preserves the silence. One instructor wrote that a student dreamed of a woman giving birth endlessly in candlelight, her body never healing, her eyes fixed on a door that would not open. When the student described the dream aloud, the entire class was dismissed. The boy vanished that night. The seminary burned its dormitory wing 2 years later. While the children were scattered, Hannah was moved again. Each plantation reported the same thing just before her departure. She began to speak, not to people, but to rooms. She whispered to corners, to floorboards, to empty beds where infants once lay. One overseer claimed she spoke names that were not recorded anywhere, names that later appeared, years later, on headstones miles away. A letter from a plantation owner's wife reveals the most disturbing detail yet. She asked me how many times a soul can be divided before it forgets itself. That night, the woman miscarried. Hannah was gone by morning. By 1840, church records grow frantic. The tone shifts from authority to fear. Phrases appear again and again. Containment failing. Births accelerating. Memory spreading laterally. The church bell rings twice one March. Then 3 times the next. Hannah gives birth for the 5th recorded time. After that, no more plantations. No more transfers. No more Hannah. Only one final line in the church ledger. The vessel has fulfilled her burden. The burden remains. After 1840, Hannah is erased. Not gradually. Not imperfectly. Completely. No plantation inventory lists her. No census margin marks her presence. No death notice. No burial ledger. No runaway advertisement. For an enslaved woman who had been meticulously recorded for over a decade, this absence is unnatural. But disappearance was not the goal. Disconnection was. A private letter from a junior clergyman, found folded inside a courthouse wall during renovations in 1936, contains a single confession. We did not kill her. We unanchored her. What that meant was never explained. But the same letter describes a ritual performed beneath a church altar, involving 5 baptismal bowls, soil from 5 plantations, and a woman who refused sleep even when her body demanded it. After that night, the bell was never rung again, and Hannah was never seen. In the decades that followed, small southern towns began reporting identical phenomena, despite having no shared history. Women miscarried on March 19th. Infants were born staring, silent. Churches reported candles extinguishing themselves during sermons on obedience. And always, someone would mention a dream. A woman standing in a doorway, bare feet on cold wood, hands scarred not by labor, but by holding something that kept being taken. In one town, a child asked why the lady under the floor cried when bells rang. There was no basement. The church was condemned anyway. Between 1855 and 1890, state asylums across the South admitted women with a shared diagnosis: reproductive melancholia with fixation on loss. Doctors noted unusual behaviors. The patients claimed they had given birth, but could not remember where. They insisted their children were alive, but scattered. They spoke of being moved without walking. Most disturbingly, several patients described memories that did not belong to them. One woman recited the names of plantations she had never visited. Another spoke fluent Latin despite no education. A third screamed during sleep whenever church bells were audible, even from miles away. Doctors dismissed it as hysteria. The women were sterilized. The records were sealed. Institutions can hide facts. They cannot erase patterns. By the late 1800s, something had gone wrong. The children, now adults, began to find each other. Not by names. Not by blood. By recognition. Former orphans reported meeting strangers who felt already known. Seminary dropouts spoke of shared dreams. 2 men in different states independently wrote journals describing the same woman standing at the foot of their bed, whispering. You were not meant to be whole alone. Churches noticed an increase in defections. Congregations fractured. Sermons lost their authority. The silence Hannah carried was leaking. In 1902, a single document surfaces in a private archive labeled only. The distribution. It outlines a policy never publicly acknowledged. Children of untraceable maternal origin were to be separated geographically, assigned contradictory identities, prevented from reproducing within proximity. The justification is chillingly brief. Consolidation risks remembrance. Hannah was never mentioned by name. She didn't need to be. In a suppressed testimony taken in 1911, an aging minister breaks. He admits the church believed Hannah carried something older than bondage, a memory that survived by division. Not evil, not holy, persistent. They believed that if her children ever gathered, they would remember not just her, but everything done to her. And that memory, once spoken aloud, would not stay buried. One woman recited the names of plantations she had never visited. Another spoke fluent Latin despite no education. A third screamed during sleep whenever church bells were audible, even from miles away. Doctors dismissed it as hysteria. The women were sterilized. The records were sealed. Institutions can hide facts. They cannot erase patterns. By the late 1800s, something had gone wrong. The children, now adults, began to find each other. Not by names, not by blood, by recognition. Former orphans reported meeting strangers who felt already known. Seminary dropouts spoke of shared dreams. Two men in different states independently wrote journals describing the same woman standing at the foot of their bed, whispering, "You were not meant to be whole alone." Churches noticed an increase in defections. Congregations fractured. Sermons lost their authority. The silence Hannah carried was leaking. In 1902, a single document surfaces in a private archive labeled only. The distribution. It outlines a policy never publicly acknowledged. Children of untraceable maternal origin were to be separated geographically, assigned contradictory identities, prevented from reproducing within proximity. The justification is chillingly brief. Consolidation risks remembrance. Hannah was never mentioned by name. She didn't need to be. In a suppressed testimony taken in 1911, an aging minister breaks. He admits the church believed Hannah carried something older than bondage, a memory that survived by division. Not evil, not holy, persistent. They believed that if her children ever gathered, they would remember not just her, but everything done to her. And that memory, once spoken aloud, would not stay buried. By the early 20th century, the problem was no longer institutional. It was domestic. Families across the South began recording the same quiet terror inside their homes. Children asked questions no one had taught them. Grandmothers dreamed of places they had never seen. Men woke up reciting plantation inventories in their sleep, lists of bodies, ages, losses. Family Bibles became confessionals. In the margins beside births and deaths, handwritten notes appeared. Child cries at bells. She says a woman watches from the door. March 19th again. These families were not related by blood. They were related by inheritance of memory. Doctors could not explain it. Ministers refused to address it. And when families compared notes, at funerals, at revivals, at county fairs, they realized the same thing. They were remembering something together. In 1923, the town of Briar Hollow voted to dismantle its church bell. Not replace it, not repair it, destroy it. For decades, the bell had rung on its own every March 19th at midnight. No rope was attached. No sexton admitted responsibility. The sound woke infants screaming and caused grown men to weep without knowing why. When the bell was finally pulled down, witnesses said it cracked, not from impact, but from inside. That same year, 6 women in Briar Hollow gave birth prematurely. None of the infants cried. The town newspaper printed one sentence before shutting down permanently. We removed the sound, but not what listened. For nearly a century, the name Hannah had vanished from records connected to the events. Then it reappeared. In a 1938 Works Progress Administration interview, an elderly woman, former midwife, was asked about unusual births. She paused, then said, "You mean Hannah's children?" The interviewer asked who Hannah was. The woman refused to answer, but began to hum a hymn no longer sung. One that matched lyrics found only in the unaffiliated church ledger from the 1830s. When pressed further, She whispered. She didn't die. She learned how not to stay. The interview ends abruptly. The tape is damaged beyond recovery. In the 1940s, state authorities quietly merged orphan records, asylum files, and church documents into a single restricted archive. The goal was simple: break the pattern by obscuring it. Names were altered, dates shifted, towns renamed, fires blamed on accidents. Silence became policy, but memory had already crossed the final barrier. It no longer needed records. People began dreaming the same dream in different states. A woman standing barefoot in a doorway. A corridor of cradles stretching into darkness. A voice saying, "You were never lost. You were separated." Psychiatrists called it mass suggestion. They were wrong. Hannah was not a ghost, not a demon, not a symbol. She was a woman subjected to a system so absolute that even her suffering had to be managed, redistributed, and hidden. What the institutions failed to understand, what they still fail to understand, is that trauma does not disappear when divided. It multiplies. Every forced birth, every taken child, every erased name became a fragment, and fragments remember how to find each other. In 1949, during routine renovations of a county courthouse, workers discovered a sealed attic crawlspace. Inside were 12 crates, unlabeled, unregistered. Every document inside was a copy, carbon duplicates of records that officially never existed. Plantation ledgers, orphan intake forms, seminary journals, asylum reports, and one folder marked only with a single word: Hannah. No last name, no classification. Inside was not a biography. It was a distribution map. Lines radiated outward from 5 plantations, branching into towns, schools, churches, families. Red ink marked places where incidents had occurred. Blue ink marked where silence had been restored. In the margin, written in a trembling hand, "We believed scattering would end it. We were wrong." The final document is not medical. It is theological, a confession written by 3 men who never signed their names. They admit Hannah was never chosen at random. She was identified as a woman who remembered too much, who retained ancestral memory through trauma, through blood, through loss. They believed her body could be used to dilute remembrance by dividing it. Each child was not meant to live freely. Each child was meant to carry a fraction. But memory is not weakened by division. It becomes distributed. They ended the document with a warning. She does not need to be alive to continue. Today, the date March 19th still produces anomalies. Hospitals quietly report increased premature births. Churches cancel evening services without explanation. Social workers note clusters of adoptees seeking biological history at the same time. And people, ordinary people, write to archives asking the same question in different words. Why do I feel like something was taken from me before I was born? They do not know Hannah's name, but they know the feeling. Hannah was not erased. She was embedded in towns that still ring bells, in families who inherit grief without stories, in institutions built on silence. Her children did not disappear. They became the carriers of a truth too large to hold in one body. The horror is not that this happened. The horror is that it worked, just long enough for everyone to forget why things felt wrong. The attic archive was resealed in 1951. Officially, nothing was found, but copies of the documents exist. They surface occasionally, in private collections, in estate sales, in boxes no one remembers packing. This story is one of them. If you felt recognition while listening, if something tightened when the date was mentioned, that is not fear. That is memory. And memory, once spoken, does not return to silence.